He had expected just about everything. A rejection, an approval, a smile, or perhaps not. A look of surprise or recognition. A raised eyebrow, shyly downcast eyes, a dismissive gesture. Everything, but not this. That a simple gesture could trigger so much. That her world could be so different from his. He should have known. Should have picked up on some of the signals. After all, he had observed her long enough. Not that she had known. All the time he had been there, he had made sure not to get noticed. Not that he had needed to be, as it turned out. The facts were somewhat different. He had been dead silent, which turned out to be unnecessary. She was suddenly there. Sitting with her back against the old linden tree that, from day one, seemed to stretch its thick, densely overgrown branches with large leaves to protect her. He had sat on the old bench behind her at a short distance, but far enough away to be able to watch the spectacle before him unnoticed. His hand, holding the sharp black pencil, rested on the open sketchbook lying on his lap, while he stared in utter astonishment at the painting created by the sunbeams piercing the canopy and gently touching the girl in front of him. Then he had started drawing. Almost automatically, barely aware of the movements of his hand. The next day, he went to the park again. Full of anticipation, hoping, praying, and yet surprised when he saw her again, sitting against the same tree. Her long black hair flowed softly in the wind as she absorbed herself in the book she was reading. The sun gently caressed her cheeks, playing with the shadows that moved erratically across her face, as if she was just as happy to see the girl again as the man sitting on the bench with his sketchbook. The days had slipped by with the same scene repeating itself, and he had marveled at the seemingly effortless way in which the girl appeared to move entirely within her own world. Undisturbed by what was happening around her. She didn't seem bothered by the lewd remarks of pubescent young men passing her, nor even slightly unsettled by the large black dog chasing a duck with a great deal of noise. The low-flying passenger plane that had made him cringe seemed to her to be in a different dimension. And all this time, he continued drawing. Every detail that caught his eye about her found its way onto the paper. The flutter of her lightly accentuated eyelashes as she blinked against the sun. The wide, wondering eyes at the butterfly that landed on the open book. The dimples that appeared in her cheeks when she read something funny. Almost a week had passed, and in that time, he hadn't spoken a word to her. He didn't know exactly why himself. Had he not wanted to disrupt the invisible bond between them? Had he unconsciously known what he knew now? Would that have made a difference? There had been a moment when he had almost broken the silence. She had stood up and walked to the path. Probably to go home. Unaware of the cyclist approaching from behind. A cry of warning was on his lips when he realized she didn't seem to hear the loud ting-ting of the bicycle bell, but the swerving movement the cyclist initiated at the last moment made him swallow his words. Glad that he didn't have to give up his unnoticed presence just yet. But today was the day he had decided to make himself known to her. The final pencil strokes had been drawn, and the drawing, consisting of various shades of black and grey, had met with his approval. More than that, for he had actually just been quite proud of the result, and he would have liked to share that with the subject of his creative outburst. Not that he was the kind of man to fish for compliments in this way, although he had naturally hoped for a positive reaction. No, it simply would not have demonstrated good moral standards if he hadn't wanted to inform her of what he had done. Of course, the idea of striking up a conversation with her for once certainly hadn't been averse to him. And so he had stood up and walked towards her with the sketchbook under his arm. Leaning against the tree with her back to him, she had given him another hint by not reacting when he broke the silence behind her. He had not picked up the signal and placed his hand on her shoulder. The young woman, visibly shaken, jumped up like a spring, making it seem to him as if she flew at least 10 centimeters into the air. The book fell from her lap as she whirled around and looked at him with wide-open eyes. He was too stunned to react immediately, and the woman now looked around, startled, as if expecting even more unpleasant surprises that could jump out of the bushes at any moment. When that didn't happen, she turned back and looked at him uncomprehendingly. He had expected everything, absolutely everything, but certainly not this. The girl's reaction flooded him with guilt and shame. He had startled her terribly, while the signals had been so clear. How could he have missed them? Her eyes softened now, almost sympathetic. "Sorry," she said, circling her right fist over her chest. "I didn't hear you coming." A single keyword accompanied the fluid gestures. "Oh, no," he exclaimed quickly, surprised at the almost nonchalant way she took the blame upon herself. "I'm sorry." With those last words, he almost automatically adopted the circling motion from her, which brought a smile to her face. With a graceful gesture, she tapped the side of her head and then pointed at him, shaking her head no. "You couldn't have known." She pointed now at herself and then at her ear. "Yes, I did," he said, pointing to the bench behind her. She followed his finger and looked at the spot he pointed to, then shrugged her shoulders, shaking her head, and looked at him uncomprehendingly. "I sat there every day. For a week." He had begun his confession with a slight hesitation, but saw that its meaning was slowly dawning on her. Her eyes widened, and her body adopted a closed posture. She took a step back, while continuing to stare at him out of the corner of her eye. The silence that followed was familiar to her, but felt very uncomfortable to him. He searched for something to break the tension or at least make it clear to her that he meant no harm, but nothing would come to mind. No words or gestures gave him even the slightest hint that they would achieve anything. Then she saw the sketchbook that he still held firmly under his arm, as if it were his most prized possession. "What is that?" The unnatural sound with which she had spoken the sentence reached his ears, and there, to his own surprise, it was translated into the most melodious sound he had ever heard. As she stood there before him, with those big brown eyes in a pretty face with raven black hair, she reminded him of a character from a Japanese animated film. "I have drawn you," he heard himself say with a trembling voice. She took a step closer and stretched out her hand with a flare of authoritative power, into which he unhesitatingly let the book with the drawing slide. She stroked very softly and carefully with her fingers over the lines that he had put on the paper so meticulously, yet passionately, over the past few days, and he saw how a mixture of astonished wonder took possession of her. She carefully sank to her knees until she sank like a fairy tale princess onto the lush green grass, her back finding support against the broad bark of the linden tree, which had become so familiar to her. She looked up briefly and patted the spot beside her. "Or do you not have time?" she asked with almost childlike sincerity. He looked back into her eyes and smiled. He would give her all the time in the world, and even more if she asked for it.